I think this might be an opportune moment to pivot back to the South
Yes.
Caucasus, Kit, to do a follow up on the discussion we had with Armenian journalist Alison Tamizian Muse, which we had earlier this week. Be sure to check that out.
It's a fantastic interview, if I do say so myself. And I think that Alison has some, stunning local insights into what is actually an extremely important region geopolitically, which gets like zero coverage whatsoever in the media. That has enormous global significance. So please do check it out.
Yes, be sure to check that out. Now, what I've got on screen here, for the benefit of the audience, is a document from 2009. It's called Azerbaijan-NATO: 15 Years of Partnership, and you can see there the head of the Baku crime family and employee of the month for British imperialism, 1994 to present. That's President Aliyev, shaking hands with the NATO officialdom, and that's Jaap de Hoop Scheffer, a name I'm not convinced is real, the former NATO Secretary General, shaking hands there. And this is a celebratory document that comes from 2009 regarding the 15 years of partnership between Azerbaijan and NATO. Now, interestingly enough, the main focus of this document is on the Azerbaijani contribution to regional security as related to the NATO occupation of Afghanistan, and the Azerbaijani contribution to the ISAF force that was once deployed there. But interestingly enough, this partnership agreement between Azerbaijan and NATO stems from 1994, a year after the coup that brought Aliyev's father, Heydar Aliyev, by the way, a notoriously corrupt pro-capitalist member of the Soviet late period Politburo, who ran the Soviet Azerbaijan as a private fiefdom for many years and enriched himself in the process. So this is like a prime mafia family that used to be that they got by in the Soviet Union and enriched themselves by being close to Brezhnev. Then later by with Aliyev's father, Heydar Aliyev, making himself into a reliable tool of British imperialism. But Kit, why don't you can you elaborate upon how the Aliyev family found their way into the circumstances they're in now, which is as the unchallenged, as far as we know, rulers of this British neo.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, Azerbaijan is absolutely fascinating. It is. I actually know personally people who have fled there because it is the kind of place where if you criticize the government in a private conversation, there is a likelihood that the secret police will come after you. Yes, there is zero critical media reporting on the government whatsoever. It ranks its Freedom House freedom ranking, Freedom House being a wing of the National Endowment for Democracy, is 0. Which is like pretty astonishing. But of course, you never hear about how repressive Azerbaijan is because it is a bought and paid for puppet of the West, Britain in particular. Now, in June 1993. Aliyev, in the wake of the dissolution of the Soviet Union, emerged as because yes, he, as you say, had effectively run it as a personal fiefdom, particularly towards the end of the Soviet Union. He emerged as as the undisputed leader of the country, and was it was deeply unpopular, and there were other political factions that were vying for power and doing so via elections. In the 1992 presidential election, Aliyev was barred from running because he was too old, because under local laws, you couldn't be president if you're over 65. Quite a fine principle that I think the US might be able to benefit from, if not other countries as well. But that's a discussion for another episode. Anyway, the point is that in 1993 there was an absolutely savage coup d'état led by Aliyev, and he has been occupied a position of total power ever since. His family basically run every wing of the state. There is total capture of the judiciary, of the media, of pretty much everything, and Aliyev sits at the head of this. Now, number one, there are very, very, very credible indications that BP, which is effectively a wing of MI6, provided the private military and security goons that helped Aliyev seize power. There was also a Daily Mail report that was published in, I believe it was 2007, and then removed from the internet entirely at direct British government direction, in which a former senior BP executive who was in charge of securing lucrative contracts in the former Soviet Union, in particular Azerbaijan, he stated that they worked with MI6 to get local officials on board with the rape and pillage of their vast oil and gas reserves. Millions were spent on debauched parties for local government officials where champagne, cocaine, and prostitutes were on tap. And MI6 was well aware of and encouraged these activities. To quote unquote influence the political complexion of the region. And as our discussion with Alison earlier this week kind of hinted at, the same thing is now spreading to our neighboring Armenia, which historically has been at significant odds with Azerbaijan for a variety of reasons, has frequently been at war with Azerbaijan, and also historically has been a very close ally of Russia. It is now ruled by an individual called Panchian, who is shredding all of his country's long-standing close ties with Russia in favor of a pro-Western stance, and is cutting deals with Aliyev, much to the disgust of much of the local population. Azerbaijan is also, just to round this out, I might add, it has a very special relationship with Israel, and it purchases a lot of weapons from Israel. It provides a staging ground for attacks on Israel's regional enemies. Of course, it neighbors Iran, which means that it's a very valuable staging post and bit of real estate from the perspective of Tel Aviv. So none of this ever really emerges in the media, but Azerbaijan is a much more significant country than one might give it credit for. And that is reflected in the extent to which Britain is all in on maintaining this total dictatorship.
Yes, and it's worth just mentioning some facts and figures at this point. According to information from Azerbaijan's own government, and this is from May of this year, British foreign direct investment in the Azerbaijani economy totals just over £37 billion over the last 30 odd years or so. And also there are more than 500 British companies that are currently operating inside Azerbaijan. So that's a big deal. And it represents probably the most successful example of British penetration into the former Soviet space in terms of consistent economic benefit. Ukraine is, as we've already established, the British operation now runs for different reasons. In terms of Azerbaijan, I mean, this is a very successful operation that the British have run for the last 30 years. And the only slightly confusing thing to me is that one has to ask the question of like, well, what did Moscow and Tehran think they were dealing with? Britain, I mean, the British ruling class are not, given to flights of sentimentality. Certainly not towards people like Aliyev. If you put 37 billion pounds at least into a country, and you have 500 British businesses operating there, and you helped the father of the current dictator come to absolute power over 30 years ago, that's a serious commitment. And the British don't put that much money in and obtain that much profit from this relationship without exercising a hell of a lot of influence over the Azerbaijani state, basically. So, I mean, I don't expect that we can answer this question this week, but it does rather raise the question of like, well, what exactly did the Iranians and the Russians think was going on here? Given that the not only is it that Britain has thoroughly penetrated Azerbaijan, but also that going along with Britain in the slipstream come Turkey and Israel. And it also raises an interesting question, which is that there was a number of people, I would say, in the multipolar media space, which is something of a jungle, claiming that like Turkey was drifting away from NATO, etc., etc. Now, Erdogan's always got an agenda to maximize his own advantage, but the Azerbaijan's question really shows that Britain, Turkey, Israel are absolutely unified in working together, both against Russia and against Iran. And the whole history there reveals that. So quite what the future holds for Azerbaijan is interesting, given that the British power is fading. But it shows that this is one of the most successful examples of British neo-colonialism in recent years. And it's no wonder that all references to it disappear from the internet before they can even be put up.
Yeah, indeed, and I think that just more generally as well that I think the Azerbaijan's geographical status as a country that borders Iran, and for some reason inexplicably Iranian leaders still seek at least positive, constructive, positive relations with, despite everything, it's really quite remarkable, and inexplicable even. But it's like you've got to bear in mind that that Azerbaijan is a member of, as well as being a kind of NATO member, non-member. It is formally a member of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Now, as we have discussed before, this is effectively a CIA front, and it is frequently used by the US and other imperial powers to foment conflict when the OSCE's formal mission is conflict prevention. Now, we discussed in our two-part epic Yugoslavia special the role that the OSCE played in the bombing of Yugoslavia. We didn't delve into how the OSCE mission in Ukraine was handing detailed information and location data and intelligence to NATO and Ukrainian forces on the Donbass separatists to assist with their brutal war on Donetsk and Lugansk. But anyway, this, as Alex has up on screen now, this is from 2012. It's a report on how the OSCE's delegation, various member delegations, they introduced a resolution in 2012 calling for the OSCE to work for a quote unquote diplomatic solution to the threat of a nuclear-armed Iran. Of course, this is a threat which never existed until Israel made the rather catastrophic decision to try and destroy Iran's alleged nuclear program, which failed miserably and makes Iran wanting to develop nuclear weapons much more likely. Again, a discussion for another story, another edition. But this OSCE report notes that Iran shares nearly 2,500 kilometers of borders with OSCE members, including Azerbaijan. And it is suggested that these states, including Turkey, Armenia, and Turkmenistan, could play a role in neutralizing Iran's then non-existent nuclear program. So, quite what Azerbaijan has done as a result of this, we don't know. Although, given that their leadership is completely dependent on British and American brute force and diplomatic support and Israeli weapons to exist, it wouldn't be surprising if words were had with them behind closed doors and they did something as a result.
Mm. Well, that does rather bring up the question of, I mean, first of all, the nuclear program is code, by the way. In case you, dear viewers, haven't picked up on this yet, the Iranian nuclear program has been like a civilian nuclear program for many years. And so when Netanyahu, or Mr. Milakovsky, as that's his real name, jumps around and starts screaming about it, when you see OSCE, which is, again, as Kit says, CIA MI6 front operation, starts issuing various proclamations about it, when you see this mentioned in the media, what this really means is they're looking for a way to carry out a regime change operation in Iran. That's the coded language that they're going to use to justify it. And notice how when the US began its regime change attempt in Iran recently, the talk of the nuclear program dropped away for a while pretty quickly. When they thought that they were on the right track and that they were going to get regime change, suddenly it was all about total surrender, the Ayatollah must die, that kind of thing. The nuclear program gets forgotten when the prize itself comes within view, which is to destroy the Islamic Republic and reverse the gains that Iran made after the Islamic Revolution of 1979 to 1980. So this is what this is really all about. And this brings up the question of the Azerbaijani role in the death of President Raisi. Because there's a series of extraordinary things about the what I think we can confidently say is the assassination of Raisi, just after he'd been to Azerbaijan to see Aliyev. And the fact is that given that Azerbaijan has been riddled with MI6 operatives for over 30 years and Mossad operatives and operatives from Turkish military intelligence and Turkish fascist organizations, which is kind of the same thing. Who do you think might have been behind it? Given all of the people who have, and we know the Israelis have a base there, and that the MI6, CIA, etc., are crawling all over this place. So exactly why they thought it was a good idea to send the bunch of senior Iranian officials into the lion's den and then fly out through mist-covered mountain country in an out-of-date Canadian helicopter that was purchased by the Shah before the Islamic Revolution, does rather raise a lot of very interesting questions about, who was responsible and who the hell is making the decisions inside Iran, doesn't it?
Yeah, indeed. And of course, there was that rather infamous helicopter crash in the UK in the mid-90s, which in very similar strange, uncertain conditions crashed, and on board were a large number of senior high-ranking British intelligence officials who took a very hard line on Northern Ireland at a time that the British government was trying to cool things down there. So there's potentially a blueprint which might originate in London there,